The bullet that shattered the window pane in Missouri Valley's General Store on that scorching August afternoon in 1878 changed everything, sending Meredith Vaughn diving beneath the counter where she would hide long after the shooting stopped, her voice trapped somewhere between her heart and her throat where it would remain silent for months to come. The robbery lasted 7 minutes. 7 minutes that stretched into an eternity as 3 masked men stormed through Evanston, Wyoming territory, firing their revolvers into the air and demanding money from every establishment on Main Street. Meredith had been arranging bolts of calico fabric when the first shot rang out. Her employer, elderly Mr. Henderson, had stepped into the back room to fetch more inventory. The masked men never entered the general store, but that hadn't mattered. The sounds of chaos, the screaming, the thundering hooves, and the acrid smell of gunpowder had transported Meredith back to a darker time, a buried memory from her childhood that surged forward with devastating clarity. She had been 7 years old when raiders attacked her family's homestead outside St. Louis. Her parents had hidden her in the root cellar, whispering urgently that she must remain absolutely silent no matter what she heard. She had obeyed, pressing her hands over her mouth as the sounds of violence echoed above her. When silence finally came and a neighbor found her the next morning, her parents were gone, murdered for the few dollars they had saved. Meredith had not spoken for nearly a year after that day. Now, at 22 years old, that same paralyzing fear crashed over her like a wave. When Mr. Henderson finally found her beneath the counter, trembling and pale, she tried to tell him she was fine, but no words came. Her mouth opened, but her throat constricted, refusing to cooperate. The terror was back, and it had stolen her voice once more. The days that followed were a blur of concerned faces and gentle questions she could not answer. Mr. Henderson, kind as he was, could not keep an employee who could not speak to customers. He gave her a week's wages and a sorrowful apology. The boarding house where Meredith lived was run by Mrs. Calhoun, a stern woman with little patience for what she called hysterics. When Meredith could not explain what had happened or when she might recover, Mrs. Calhoun gave her 3 days to find alternative arrangements. Meredith sat in her small room on that third evening, her few possessions packed in a worn carpetbag, with nowhere to go and no way to ask for help. She had $23 to her name, no family, and a voice that refused to work no matter how desperately she willed it. The fear had wrapped itself around her like iron chains, and she could not break free. That was when she remembered the advertisement she had seen posted at the general store 2 weeks earlier. A ranch outside town was seeking someone to help with cooking and light housekeeping. The pay was modest, but included room and board. At the time, Meredith had considered it beneath her abilities. She had been a shop girl with prospects, or so she had thought. Now she was desperate. The next morning, she hired a wagon driver to take her to the Bar 7 Ranch, 10 miles west of Evanston. She showed him the address written on a piece of paper and pressed $2 into his weathered hand. He looked at her curiously when she did not speak, but seemed unbothered by her silence. The road wound through high desert country, with sage brush stretching toward distant mountains. The August sun beat down mercilessly, and Meredith clutched her carpetbag, wondering if she was making a terrible mistake. The Bar 7 Ranch appeared as they crested a small rise. It was larger than Meredith had expected, with a sprawling ranch house built of weathered wood, a substantial barn, several outbuildings, and a network of corrals where horses milled about. Cattle dotted the landscape in every direction. The driver pulled up to the main house and helped her down, then departed quickly, eager to return to town before the heat of the day grew worse. Meredith stood alone in the dusty yard, her heart pounding. She could turn back, she thought. She could use her remaining money to buy a stage ticket to somewhere else, anywhere else. But where would she go? And how would she survive without a voice to find work? She forced her feet to move toward the front door. Before she could knock, it swung open, revealing a tall man in his late 20s with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. He wore dusty work clothes and a worn hat that he quickly removed when he saw her. "Can I help you, miss?" His voice was low and gentle, with a slight drawl that spoke of Texas origins. Meredith opened her mouth, but nothing emerged. Panic fluttered in her chest. She fumbled in her pocket and pulled out the crumpled advertisement, holding it up with a trembling hand. The man studied the paper, then her face, his expression thoughtful rather than annoyed. "You are here about the position," she nodded vigorously. "I am Jacob Anderson. I own this ranch." He paused, waiting for her to introduce herself. When she remained silent, his brow furrowed slightly, but not with anger. "Are you all right, miss?" Meredith pulled out the small writing tablet and pencil she had purchased that morning. With shaking hands, she wrote, "My name is Meredith Vaughn. I cannot speak, but I can work. I need this position." Jacob read the words carefully, then looked at her with those steady blue eyes. She braced herself for rejection, for the door to close in her face. Instead, he stepped back and gestured for her to enter. "Come inside, Miss Vaughn. It is too hot to stand in the sun." The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly well maintained, though clearly in need of a woman's touch. The furniture was sturdy but dust-covered, and dishes were stacked in the kitchen area. Jacob directed her to sit at a large wooden table while he fetched 2 glasses and a pitcher of water from the cold cellar. "I will be honest with you, Miss Vaughn," he said as he poured water for them both. "I need help around here. My wife passed away 18 months ago from fever, and I have been managing the household alone while running the ranch. It has been difficult." His voice caught slightly on the word wife, and Meredith saw the pain that still lingered in his eyes. "I can offer you room and board plus $20 a month. Your own room in the house, 3 meals a day. The work is cooking, cleaning, laundry, and tending the kitchen garden, sometimes mending clothes." Meredith wrote quickly, "I can do all of that. I am a hard worker." Jacob nodded slowly. "I do not doubt it, but I need to understand your situation. Is your silence permanent, and are you in some kind of trouble?" She hesitated, then wrote carefully, "I was caught in the robbery in town last week. The shooting brought back bad memories from my childhood. I could speak before that day. The doctor says my voice may return, but he does not know when. I am not in trouble with the law." Jacob read her words twice, his expression softening. "I heard about that robbery. Terrible business. 3 men, they caught them the next day trying to cross into Utah. They will hang for it." He was quiet for a moment, turning his glass in his hands. "My wife, Sarah, her last days were hard. She wanted to speak but could barely manage a whisper. I learned then that words are not the only way people communicate." Meredith felt unexpected tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back, surprised by his kindness. "If you are willing to work, I am willing to give you the position," Jacob said. "But I need to know you will be safe here. I have 5 ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse. They are good men, respectful, but if being around strangers frightens you, this might not be the right place." She wrote, "I need to face my fear, not hide from it. I want to try." Jacob extended his hand. "Then welcome to the Bar 7, Miss Vaughn." She shook his hand, feeling the calluses of hard work and the strength in his grip. There was something reassuring about Jacob Anderson, something that made the tight band of fear around her chest loosen just slightly. He showed her to her room on the 2nd floor. It was simple but clean, with a bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the ranch and the mountains beyond. It was the nicest room Meredith had lived in since leaving St. Louis years ago. "Take some time to settle in," Jacob said from the doorway. "We eat supper at 6 o'clock. Nothing fancy, just hearty food. I will introduce you to the ranch hands then. They know to expect someone new, though I will explain about your voice so they do not pepper you with questions." After he left, Meredith sat on the bed and allowed herself a moment to breathe. She had a place to stay. She had work. She was not destitute on the streets of Evanston with no prospects. It was enough for now. That evening, she descended to the kitchen and began preparing supper using the supplies she found in the pantry and cold cellar. There was salt pork, beans, potatoes, onions, and dried herbs. She had learned to cook from the woman who ran the orphanage where she had lived after her parents' death. Cooking had been one of the few comforts in those difficult years, a way to create something good from simple ingredients. The ranch hands arrived promptly at 6, filing through the back door with weathered faces and curious eyes. Jacob introduced them as they washed up at the pump outside. There was Tommy, barely 20, with a quick smile and red hair. Frank, older and grizzled, who had worked ranches his whole life. Louis, who spoke Spanish and English with equal fluency. And 2 brothers, Peter and Samuel, who were quiet but seemed kind. "This is Miss Meredith Vaughn," Jacob said to the assembled men. "She will be helping with the household work. Miss Vaughn cannot speak right now due to an illness, so please be patient and respectful." The men nodded, tipping their hats politely. If they found her silence strange, they kept it to themselves. They sat down at the long table and Meredith served the meal she had prepared, her hands steady despite her nervousness. "This is mighty good, Miss Vaughn," Tommy said after his first bite. "Best meal I have had since." He trailed off, glancing at Jacob. "Since Sarah passed," Jacob finished quietly. "It is all right to say it, Tommy. Thank you, Miss Vaughn. This is excellent." The other men murmured their agreement, and Meredith felt a small spark of satisfaction. She might not be able to speak, but she could still contribute, still be useful. After the meal, the ranch hands returned to the bunkhouse while Jacob helped Meredith clear the table. She tried to wave him away, indicating that cleaning was her job, but he shook his head. "On this ranch, everyone helps," he said simply. "Besides, it gives me a chance to explain how things work around here." As they washed and dried dishes together, Jacob talked. He told her about the ranch, how it had been his dream since he was a boy in Texas. He had come to Wyoming territory 5 years ago with Sarah, his childhood sweetheart, and they had built the bar 7 from nothing. They had planned to fill the house with children, to create a legacy that would last generations. But fever took her, Jacob said, staring out the window at the darkening sky. One day she was fine, laughing and planting the garden. 3 days later she was gone. The doctor could not save her. His voice was heavy with grief that had not yet healed. "I threw myself into the ranch work after that. It was easier than facing the empty house." Meredith wrote in her tablet, "I am sorry for your loss." Jacob read her words and nodded. "Thank you, and I am sorry for whatever happened to you that took your voice. But I have learned that healing takes time. Maybe we are both working on that." It was a strange bond, born of shared grief and loss, but Meredith felt it nonetheless. Here was a man who understood that silence could be a prison as real as iron bars. The days fell into a rhythm. Meredith rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for the ranch hands. She cooked, cleaned, tended the garden, and slowly brought order to the household that had been neglected for too long. The work was hard but satisfying. Her body ached at the end of each day, but it was the good ache of honest labor. Jacob was a constant, quiet presence. He worked alongside his ranch hands from dawn until dusk, mending fences, tending cattle, breaking horses. But he always made time to check on Meredith, to ensure she had everything she needed. He spoke to her often, not requiring responses, just sharing his thoughts about the ranch, the weather, or memories of better times. "You know, Miss Vaughn," he said one evening as they sat on the porch after supper, watching the sun set behind the mountains, "I appreciate that you are not trying to fill the silence with chatter. Sarah used to say that people are afraid of quiet, so they fill it with meaningless words. But quiet can be peaceful, do you not think?" Meredith nodded, a small smile touching her lips. It was the first time she had smiled since the robbery, Jacob noticed. "That is a good look on you," he said softly, smiling. A week passed, then two. Meredith grew more comfortable with the rhythms of ranch life. The hands treated her with respect, often leaving small gifts of gratitude. A wildflower bouquet from Tommy, a rocking chair Frank repaired for her. Louis taught her some Spanish words, writing them out so she could learn. But it was Jacob who truly helped her begin to heal. He never pushed her to speak, never showed frustration with her silence. Instead, he found ways to communicate that did not require words. He taught her to whistle codes, the same ones he used with the ranch hands in the fields. One whistle meant come here, two meant all clear, three meant trouble, try it, he encouraged one afternoon. Just a simple whistle. Meredith pursed her lips and tried. A faint, breathy sound emerged, not quite a whistle but something. Her eyes widened in surprise. "That is good," Jacob said encouragingly. "Keep practicing. Your voice is in there, Miss Vaughn. It just needs time to find its way out." She appreciated his faith in her, especially on the days when she felt hopeless. There were mornings when she woke with her heart pounding, the memories of gunfire and screaming flooding back. On those days, Jacob seemed to sense her distress. He would speak more, filling the air with gentle words that anchored her to the present. "My father taught me to work with horses," he said one such morning as they fed the chickens together. "He said you have to earn a horse's trust. You cannot force it. You have to be patient, gentle, consistent. Show the horse that you are not a threat, that you are someone they can rely on." He paused, scattering feed for the hens. "I think people are not so different. Trust takes time, especially when it has been broken." Meredith understood what he was really saying. He was not just talking about horses. He was talking about her, about the trust she had lost in the world and in herself. September arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hints of autumn. The cottonwoods along the creek began to turn gold, and the ranch hands started preparing for the winter ahead. Meredith helped preserve vegetables from the garden, canning beans and tomatoes, storing potatoes and onions in the root cellar. One afternoon, as she worked in the kitchen, Jacob came in looking troubled. "Miss Vaughn, I need to go into Evanston tomorrow to conduct some business. I will be gone most of the day. Will you be all right here with the hands?" Meredith hesitated, then nodded. She had not been back to town since arriving at the ranch. The thought made her anxious, but Jacob would be the one going, not her. "If you need anything, Tommy will be close by." "He is mending the corral fence," Jacob added, watching her face carefully. She wrote, "I will be fine. Do not worry." But the next morning, after Jacob left in the wagon, Meredith found herself feeling more unsettled than she had expected. She went through her usual tasks, but her mind kept drifting to the town, to the memory of shattering glass and gunfire. Her hands trembled as she kneaded bread dough, and she had to stop several times to steady herself. She was hanging laundry on the line when she heard horses approaching fast. Too fast. Her heart lurched into her throat as 3 riders came over the rise, pushing their horses hard. For a moment, pure panic seized her. They were too far away to identify, and her mind immediately conjured images of outlaws, of danger. She ran toward the house, her breath coming in short gasps. Tommy emerged from the barn, alerted by the sound of hooves. He saw the riders and walked calmly toward them, his hand resting casually on his hip near his revolver. Meredith watched from the doorway, her whole body shaking. The riders slowed as they approached, and she could now see they were not masked men but ranch hands from a neighboring property. They spoke with Tommy briefly, then turned and rode back the way they had come, their pace more leisurely. Tommy walked to the house and found Meredith gripping the door frame, her knuckles white. "Just neighbors, Miss Vaughn, nothing to fear. They were looking for some stray cattle that wandered off their land." He spoke gently, as one might to a frightened animal. "You are safe here." But Meredith could not stop shaking. The fear had taken hold, and she could not shake it loose. She stumbled to her room and sat on the bed, wrapping her arms around herself. The silence pressed in on her, and she wanted desperately to scream, to release the terror trapped inside her. But she could not even do that. When Jacob returned that evening, Tommy met him in the yard and explained what had happened. Jacob found Meredith in the kitchen, going through the motions of preparing supper, her face pale and her movements mechanical. "Miss Vaughn," he said softly. She did not turn around. "Meredith." The use of her first name made her pause. She set down the spoon she was holding and faced him, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "Tommy told me what happened. I am sorry I was not here." Jacob stepped closer but maintained a respectful distance. "Will you come outside with me? There is something I want to show you." She did not want to go, wanted to stay in the familiar safety of the kitchen, but something in his voice compelled her to follow. They walked to the barn where Jacob's favorite horse, a big bay gelding named Red, stood in his stall. "When I first got Red, he was skittish," Jacob said, stroking the horse's nose. "Someone had mistreated him before I bought him. He spooked at everything, could not be ridden without a fight. The man who sold him said he was useless, should probably be put down." Meredith watched as Red nuzzled Jacob's hand, gentle and trusting. "But I did not believe that. I could see there was a good horse underneath the fear, so I worked with him every day. Did not force anything, just spent time with him. Spoke to him, nice and low. Let him see that I was not going to hurt him." Jacob looked at Meredith, his blue eyes intense. "It took months. Some days it felt like we were not making any progress at all, but slowly he started to trust again, started to remember that not everyone in the world meant him harm." He reached out and took Red's halter, leading the horse out into the corral. Meredith followed, drawn by the quiet authority in Jacob's movements. He walked Red in slow circles, speaking constantly in that low, soothing voice. "The thing about fear, Meredith, is that it is trying to protect you. Your mind and body remember the bad things that happened, and they are working hard to keep you safe. But sometimes fear gets confused. It sees danger where there is none. It traps you in the past, where the bad things already happened, instead of letting you live in the present, where you are safe." He stopped walking and looked at her across Red's broad back. "I cannot promise you that nothing bad will ever happen again. Life does not work that way. But I can promise you that right here, right now, on this ranch, you are safe. The men who robbed the town are dead. They cannot hurt you. The riders today were just neighbors. They cannot hurt you and I." He paused, his voice growing even softer. "I will not let anyone hurt you, Meredith. I give you my word." The tears Meredith had been holding back finally spilled over. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Jacob secured Red and came around to her, hesitating only a moment before gently pulling her into an embrace. "It is all right," he murmured. "Let it out. You have been so strong carrying this alone." but you do not have to do that anymore." Meredith clung to him, crying into his shirt, releasing weeks of pent-up terror and grief. Jacob held her steady, one hand on her back, the other cradling her head, and he just let her cry. He did not try to quiet her tears or rush her through them. He simply stood there, solid and unwavering, until the storm passed. When she finally stepped back, embarrassed and exhausted, Jacob handed her a clean handkerchief from his pocket. "Feel better," she nodded, wiping her eyes. Then she did something that surprised them both. She opened her mouth and whispered, "Thank you." The words were barely audible, scratchy and faint, but they were there. Her eyes widened in shock and her hand flew to her throat. Jacob's face broke into a wide smile. "You spoke. Meredith, you spoke." She tried again, forcing the words past the fear that wanted to silence her. "Thank you, Jacob. You are welcome," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are so very welcome." It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. That night, Meredith lay in bed, touching her throat, whispering words into the darkness. Her voice was weak and hoarse, but it was returning. The silence was breaking. The next morning at breakfast, the ranch hands noticed immediately. When Meredith said a quiet "good morning," Tommy nearly dropped his coffee cup in surprise. The men erupted in smiles and congratulations, careful not to overwhelm her but clearly delighted. "It is good to hear your voice, Miss Vaughn," Frank said, his gruff manner softening. "Real good." Jacob watched from his place at the head of the table, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. After the meal, as the hands headed out for the day's work, he lingered behind. "I am proud of you," he said simply. "I know that took courage." Meredith's voice was still barely more than a whisper. "You helped me find it." "No," Jacob corrected gently. "It was always in you, I just gave you a safe place to look for it." As autumn deepened, Meredith's voice grew stronger. She spoke more each day, though she remained quiet by nature, choosing her words carefully. Jacob seemed to appreciate this about her. He was not a man who enjoyed idle chatter, and he found her thoughtful observations refreshing. They fell into the habit of sitting together after supper, when the work was done and the ranch was settling into evening. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge. Other times, they talked about everything and nothing. Jacob told her more about Sarah, about their love and their dreams, and Meredith could hear that he was healing too, able to remember without being consumed by grief. One night, Meredith found the courage to share her own story. She told Jacob about her parents, about the root cellar, about the year of silence that followed. She told him about the orphanage, about making her way to Evanston hoping for a fresh start, and about how the robbery had brought all the old terror flooding back. "I thought I was past it," she said, staring at her hands. "I thought I had become strong. But that day showed me I was still that frightened little girl, hiding in the dark." "Strength is not about never being afraid," Jacob said. "Strength is about being afraid and choosing to keep going anyway. You are one of the strongest people I have ever met, Meredith." She looked at him in surprise. "How can you say that?" "Because you survived things that would have broken most people. Because you picked yourself up after losing your voice and found a way forward. Because you are sitting here now speaking to me, even though it scares you." He reached over and took her hand, his touch warm and sure. "That is real strength." Meredith looked down at their joined hands, feeling her heart beat faster. When had Jacob become more than just her employer? When had his presence become the best part of her day? "Jacob," she said softly. "I think I—" But before she could finish, a shout came from the direction of the bunkhouse. Both of them jumped to their feet as Tommy came running toward the house. "Boss, there is a problem with the cattle. Something spooked them in the north pasture. We need everyone out there to keep them from stampeding." Jacob was already moving, grabbing his hat and calling orders. Meredith, stay inside. Lock the doors. I do not know what is out there, and I want you safe. She wanted to argue to help somehow, but she could see the urgency in his face. Be careful, she said instead. Always am. He flashed her a quick smile, then was gone into the night with Tommy. Meredith locked the doors as instructed and waited, her anxiety building with each passing minute. She could hear distant shouts and the sound of many cattle lowing in distress. An hour passed, then two. She paced the kitchen, unable to sit still. Finally, she heard the men returning. She unlocked the door and stepped onto the porch. The ranch hands were leading their horses to the barn, looking tired but uninjured. Jacob was bringing up the rear, and her heart leaped when she saw him. He dismounted and walked to her, his face smudged with dirt. It is all right. A mountain lion was stalking the herd. We ran it off and got the cattle calmed down. No losses. You are not hurt, not a scratch. He smiled at her, then seemed to really see her for the first time. You were worried about me. Of course I was worried, Meredith said, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. You could have been hurt or worse. Something shifted in Jacob's expression. He reached up and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. Meredith, he said quietly, what were you going to say earlier? Before Tommy interrupted, she knew she could deflect, could claim she had forgotten, but looking into Jacob's eyes, she found she did not want to hide anymore. I was going to say that I think I have feelings for you. Real feelings, not just gratitude. Jacob's hand cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing her skin. Good, he said simply, because I have feelings for you too. Have for a while now, truth be told. Really, she could hardly believe it. Really. You are brave and kind and resilient. You make this house feel like a home again. And when I am out there in the dark chasing cattle, I think about coming back to you, and it makes me want to be more careful to make sure I come back safe. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. May I kiss you, Meredith? Yes, she breathed. Jacob kissed her gently, a soft press of lips that held the promise of more. When they parted, Meredith felt as though the last chains of fear had finally fallen away. She was not hiding anymore. She was not silent. She was here in this moment, with this man who had spoken softly until she found her voice again. The first snow came in late October, dusting the mountains and reminding everyone that winter was approaching. The ranch hands worked double time to ensure everything was secured and supplied for the cold months ahead. Meredith threw herself into preparations, preserving the last of the garden vegetables, smoking meat, and stocking the pantry. But in the evenings, when the work was done, she and Jacob found time for each other. They took walks along the creek, bundled against the cold, talking about their hopes for the future. Jacob spoke of his plans for the ranch, of expanding the herd and maybe building a new barn in the spring. And what about you? He asked one evening as they watched the sun set behind the snow-capped peaks. What are your hopes, Meredith? She was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Her voice, though still soft, no longer wavered with uncertainty. I hope to be happy, to feel safe, to maybe have a family someday. She glanced at him shyly. I used to think those things were not possible for me, but now I think maybe they are. Jacob took both her hands in his. They are possible, more than possible. He took a deep breath, as if steeling himself for something important. Meredith, I know we have not known each other long, and I know you came here as my employee, not as a potential wife. But somewhere along the way, things changed for me. You changed them. I find myself thinking about a future with you in it, not just as the woman who runs my household, but as my partner, my wife. Meredith's heart hammered in her chest. Jacob, I am not asking you to decide right now, he continued quickly. I know you are still healing, still finding yourself. But I want you to know my intentions are honorable. I care for you deeply, Meredith Vaughn, and I would be honored if you would consider, when you are ready, becoming Mrs. Jacob Anderson." She looked at him standing there in the fading light, this good man who had given her safety and patience and kindness when she needed it most. "I do not need time," she said. "I already know my answer." Jacob's eyes widened. "You do?" "Yes," Meredith said, and her voice rang clear and strong. "Yes, Jacob, I will marry you." He swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite the snow on the ground. When he set her down, he kissed her again, deeper this time, and Meredith felt a joy she had never thought possible. They were married in November in the small church in Evanston. The ranch hands served as witnesses, all dressed in their best clothes for the occasion. Mrs. Calhoun from the boarding house attended, looking surprised that the mute girl she had evicted had done so well for herself. Mr. Henderson, Meredith's former employer, gave her a beautiful set of kitchen knives as a wedding present. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. When Meredith spoke her vows, her voice never faltered. She promised to love Jacob in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, until death parted them. And when Jacob slid the simple gold band onto her finger, she felt complete in a way she never had before. The ranch hands had prepared a surprise back at the Bar 7. They had cleaned and decorated the main house, stringing up pine boughs and wildflowers preserved from the summer. They had even attempted to bake a cake, though it was lopsided and slightly burned on one side. "We tried our best, madam," Tommy said sheepishly as Meredith laughed at the sight of it. "It is perfect," she assured him. "Thank you, all of you." Frank stepped forward, looking uncharacteristically emotional. "We just want you to know, Miss Meredith, well, Mrs. Anderson now, that you brought life back to this place. The boss is happier than we have seen him in a long time, and that is because of you." The other men nodded in agreement, and Meredith felt tears prick her eyes, but these were happy tears. That night, after the ranch hands had returned to the bunkhouse and the house was quiet, Jacob carried Meredith over the threshold of their bedroom. They had both been married before, in a sense. Jacob to Sarah, and Meredith to her fear. But this felt like a true beginning, a fresh start for them both. Jacob set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands. "I love you, Meredith Anderson. I will spend every day of my life making sure you know that." "I love you too," she whispered, and the words no longer frightened her. "You gave me back my voice, Jacob. You gave me back myself." "We gave each other a future," he corrected, and then there were no more words, only the warmth of being held and loved. Winter settled over Wyoming territory with a vengeance. Snow piled high and the temperature plummeted. The ranch work continued, harder now in the cold, but the men were experienced and prepared. Meredith kept the house warm and welcoming, cooking hearty meals that sustained them through the brutal days. She and Jacob developed the easy intimacy of a married couple. They worked side by side, anticipated each other's needs, and found joy in the simple rhythms of daily life. On the coldest nights, they sat by the fire, Meredith mending while Jacob carved small figures from wood, a hobby he had picked up as a boy. "What are you making?" she asked one evening, watching his skilled hands work. "A horse," he said, holding up the half-finished carving. "For our future son or daughter. I figure it is never too early to start preparing." Meredith felt warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the fire. "You want children?" "I do," Jacob said softly. "With you, I do. I want this house full of life and laughter again, but only when you are ready. There is no rush." She set down her mending and moved to sit beside him. "I think I am ready. I think I have been ready since you told me I was safe here." Jacob set aside his carving and pulled her close. "Then let us see what the future brings." Spring arrived like a promise kept. The snow melted, revealing green grass and wildflowers. The cattle were moved to higher pastures, and new foals were born in the barn. Meredith discovered she was pregnant in early April, and Jacob's joy was so complete that he lifted her off her feet and danced her around the kitchen. "We are having a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "Meredith, we are having a baby." The pregnancy was not easy. Meredith struggled with morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon, and the summer heat made her uncomfortable. But Jacob was attentive and patient, just as he had been when she could not speak. He brought her cool water, rubbed her swollen feet, and talked to her belly, telling their unborn child stories about the ranch. The baby was born in late November, exactly 1 year after their wedding. The labor was long and difficult, but the midwife from town was skilled, and Jacob refused to leave Meredith's side. He held her hand, wiped her brow, and whispered encouragements until their son finally arrived, howling his displeasure at the cold world. "A boy," the midwife announced, placing the baby in Meredith's arms, strong and healthy. Meredith looked down at her son, at his tiny fingers and scrunched-up face, and felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I am your mama." Jacob leaned over them, his finger gently stroking the baby's cheek. "He is perfect. You are perfect." He kissed Meredith's forehead. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months but never quite decided. Now, looking at her son, Meredith knew. "James," she said. "James Henderson Anderson. For the kind man who gave me a job when I needed one, and for his father who gave me safety and love." Jacob's eyes misted with tears. "James it is. Welcome to the world, son." The ranch hands were allowed to visit the next day, each man bringing small, awkward gifts. Tommy had carved a rattle from a piece of wood. Frank gave the baby a tiny horseshoe for luck. Louis presented a soft blanket his mother had woven. Peter and Samuel brought a miniature cowboy hat they had found in town. "He will grow into it," Peter said solemnly, and everyone laughed. Life with a baby was exhausting and wonderful. James was a good child, but he demanded constant attention. Meredith found herself running on little sleep, though Jacob helped as much as he could, walking the floor with James in the middle of the night, singing off-key lullabies. "You are terrible at singing," Meredith teased one night, watching from the bed as Jacob paced with their son. "James does not seem to mind," Jacob replied, looking down at the baby who had finally stopped crying. "He knows his papa loves him." As James grew, he became the center of life on the Bar 7. The ranch hands doted on him, teaching him to clap and laugh. Tommy was especially good with him, making funny faces that sent the baby into fits of giggles. 2 years passed in a blur of happiness. James learned to walk, then to run, tottering around the ranch yard under his mother's watchful eye. He learned to say mama and papa, then horse and cow and dog. He was fearless and curious, just like his father, and Meredith's heart was both full and terrified every time he toddled towards something potentially dangerous. "He is fine," Jacob assured her constantly. "He is a ranch child. He needs to learn." "He is barely 2 years old," Meredith protested. "He is too young to be climbing fence rails." But Jacob would just laugh and scoop up his son. "You worry too much, love. He has to learn to be tough if he is going to run this ranch someday." Meredith became pregnant again when James was 2.5. This pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Their daughter was born in the summer of 1881, a tiny, delicate girl with her mother's dark hair and her father's blue eyes. "Sarah," Jacob said when he saw her, tears streaming down his face. "If you agree, I would like to name her Sarah, after my first wife." Meredith did not hesitate. "Sarah Meredith Anderson, that is perfect." Jacob kissed her gently. "Thank you for understanding, for being generous enough to honor her memory. She was part of your life, part of what made you the man I fell in love with," Meredith said. "I am not threatened by her memory. I am grateful for the love you shared because it taught you how to love me." Little Sarah was a different child than James had been. Where he was bold and reckless, she was cautious and observant. She was content to sit in her mother's lap and watch the world, her serious eyes taking everything in. James adored his baby sister, trying to share his toys and getting frustrated when she was too young to play properly. The ranch prospered. Jacob's careful management and hard work paid off, and the Bar 7 became known as one of the best operations in the territory. He was able to hire additional hands and expand the herd. The house was enlarged with a proper parlor and an extra bedroom. Meredith found herself busier than ever, managing a household that seemed to grow by the year. But she was happy, happier than she had ever dreamed possible. The silent, frightened girl who had arrived at the ranch 5 years ago was gone, replaced by a confident woman who had found her voice and her place in the world. One evening, as she and Jacob sat on the porch watching James chase fireflies in the yard while Sarah slept inside, Jacob took her hand. "Do you remember the day you arrived here?" he asked. "How scared you looked standing in the yard with your carpet bag," Meredith smiled. "I remember thinking you were going to turn me away. I remember being so desperate, so lost." "I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever met," Jacob said. "Coming to a strange ranch, unable to speak, trusting a man you did not know, that took incredible courage." "Or incredible desperation," she said wryly. "Courage," Jacob insisted. "And I am so grateful you found your way here. You saved me, Meredith. I was drowning in grief and loneliness, and you brought me back to life." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "We saved each other. You spoke softly to me until I found my voice again. You gave me a reason to stop hiding." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their son play and listening to the sounds of the ranch settling in for the night. "You think we could handle another child?" Jacob asked suddenly. Meredith lifted her head to look at him. "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" "I am saying I love our family. I love watching our children grow, and if you are willing, I would love to have more." Meredith pretended to consider, though her heart had already said yes. "Well, I suppose 3 is a good number, or maybe 4. Jacob grinned and pulled her close. "I love you, Mrs. Anderson." "I love you too, Mr. Anderson." Their third child, a boy they named Michael, was born 2 years later. He was a happy baby with an easy temperament, and James and Sarah both loved having another sibling. The house was full of noise and chaos and laughter, everything Meredith had missed growing up in the quiet loneliness of the orphanage. As the years passed, Wyoming grew and changed. In 1890, it became a state rather than a territory. Evanston continued to expand, with new businesses and more people arriving every year. The West was becoming less wild, more settled and civilized. But the Bar 7 remained a constant, a piece of frontier life preserved. Jacob and Meredith raised their children with an understanding of the land and respect for hard work. James grew into a capable young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Sarah became a talented rider and an even better cook, helping her mother in the kitchen. Michael showed an aptitude for working with horses that reminded everyone of Jacob in his youth. When James was 17, he asked his father if he could take a more active role in running the ranch. Jacob agreed readily, proud of his son's dedication. They worked side by side, and sometimes Meredith would watch them from the kitchen window, marveling at how much James had grown, how much he resembled his father. Sarah, at 15, had begun attracting the attention of young men in town. Jacob was not pleased about this development, glowering at anyone who dared look at his daughter. Meredith found his protectiveness endearing and amusing in equal measure. "You cannot keep her a little girl forever," she told him one night after he had run off a potential suitor he deemed unsuitable. "I can try," Jacob grumbled. "She is too young to be thinking about boys." "She is the same age I was when I came to work here," Meredith pointed out. "That is different." "How is it different?" Jacob struggled for an answer, then sighed. "I do not know, it just is." Meredith kissed his cheek. "She is smart and sensible. We raised her well. Trust her." Michael, at 13, was already taller than his mother and showing signs he would match his father's height. He spent every spare moment in the barn with the horses, talking to them the way Jacob had taught him, earning their trust with patience and gentle words. One autumn evening, when the children were occupied elsewhere, Meredith and Jacob took a rare moment alone to ride out to their favorite spot, a ridge overlooking the ranch. They sat on their horses, looking down at the land they had built their life on. "You ever think about that first year?" Jacob asked. "When you could not speak, sometimes," Meredith admitted, "but it feels like a different lifetime, like it happened to someone else. You have come so far. I am proud of you." She reached over and took his hand. "We have come far together." They were in their 40s now, with silver beginning to thread through Jacob's hair and fine lines around Meredith's eyes. But they were healthy and strong, and their love had only deepened with time. "I want you to know something," Jacob said, his voice serious. "That day you arrived at the bar 7, I was at my lowest point. I was going through the motions of living but not really alive. You changed that. You brought light back into my life, and I will never stop being grateful for that." Meredith felt tears prick her eyes. "You did the same for me. I was trapped in silence and fear, and you showed me I could be strong again. You gave me a home and a family and a reason to speak again." "To us, then," Jacob said, raising their clasped hands. "To finding each other when we both needed it most." "To us," Meredith echoed. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and joys. James married a nice girl from town named Elizabeth, and they built a small house on the Bar 7 land. When they had their first child, a daughter they named Meredith after her grandmother, Meredith wept with joy at the honor. "I am a grandmother," she said to Jacob that night. "When did we get old enough to be grandparents? We are not old," Jacob protested. "We are seasoned," she laughed. "If you say so." Sarah eventually found a young man worthy of her father's approval, a teacher who had moved to Evanston from back east. Jacob grilled him mercilessly before giving his blessing for the courtship. They married when Sarah was 20, and she moved to town with her husband, though she visited the ranch frequently. Michael stayed on the Bar 7, showing no interest in leaving the land he loved. He worked alongside his father and brother, and Jacob often said he had been blessed with children who appreciated what they had built. As Jacob and Meredith entered their 50s, they began to slow down, allowing their children to take on more of the daily work. But they remained active, still taking evening walks, still sitting together on the porch to watch the sunset. One night, as they sat in their familiar spot, Meredith said, "Jacob, I need to tell you something." He looked at her with concern. "What is it? Are you not feeling well?" "No, I am fine." "Better than fine." She smiled at him. "I just wanted to say that you are the best thing that ever happened to me. I know I have told you that before, but I want to make sure you know. If I had never found the courage to come to this ranch, if you had turned me away when I could not speak, my whole life would have been different, probably worse. You saved me, Jacob. In every way a person can be saved." Jacob pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "And you saved me right back. We were both broken when we found each other, but together we became whole. That is what love does, I think. It heals the broken places." They sat there until the stars came out, two people who had found each other in the darkness and built a life full of light. The years flowed on like the creek that ran through the ranch, constant and steady. Jacob and Meredith watched their children raise families of their own. James proved to be a capable ranch manager, taking over more and more of the daily operations as Jacob's joints grew stiffer. Sarah's husband became the town schoolmaster, and she taught alongside him. Michael married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, and they built a house on the far side of the Bar 7 land. Meredith's greatest joy was her grandchildren. 7 in total, each one precious and unique. She taught them to cook, told them stories of the old days, and loved them with the fierce protectiveness of someone who knew how fragile life could be. When Meredith and Jacob celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary, their children organized a large party at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from miles around. The ranch hands, some new but many who had been there for decades, told stories of the old days. Tommy, now in his 50s with a family of his own, stood up and toasted the couple. "I remember when Miss Meredith arrived," he said. Small as a minute and scared of her own shadow, could not speak a word, but the boss, he saw something in her. He spoke to her soft and kind until she found her voice again, and in doing so, he found his own heart again. They saved each other and they built something beautiful here. To Jacob and Meredith, the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Meredith wiped away tears while Jacob held her hand tightly as they lay in bed that night, exhausted but happy. Jacob said, 30 years. Where did the time go? Into this life we built, Meredith said. Into our children and grandchildren. Into every sunrise we watched together and every challenge we faced. The time went into love, Jacob, and I would not change a single moment. He kissed her softly. Neither would I. The seasons turned as they always did. Jacob's hair went completely white, and he moved a bit slower, but his eyes were still sharp and his mind still keen. Meredith developed arthritis in her hands, making the fine needlework she loved more difficult, but she adapted and continued. They were in their 60s when Jacob fell ill. It started as a cough that would not go away, then developed into pneumonia. The doctor came from town and did what he could, but everyone knew Jacob's age was working against him. Meredith refused to leave his side. She sat by the bed, holding his hand, speaking to him in the soft voice he had once helped her find. "You remember the day we met?" she asked him during one of his lucid moments. "You could have turned me away, most men would have, but you saw past my silence to the person underneath." Jacob squeezed her hand weakly. "I saw a kindred spirit, someone who understood loss and fear but was still brave enough to keep going." "You taught me how to be brave," Meredith said, tears streaming down her face. "You taught me that silence was not safety, that I needed to find my voice again." "And you taught me that love could come twice in a lifetime," Jacob said. "That opening my heart again was not a betrayal of Sarah's memory but a way to honor it." Their children gathered around the bed. James stood tall and stoic, trying to be strong for his mother. Sarah wept openly, holding her father's other hand. Michael stood at the foot of the bed, his face a mask of grief. Jacob looked at each of them in turn. "You take care of this ranch," he said to James. "It is your legacy now." "I will, Papa," James promised. "You keep teaching those children," Jacob said to Sarah. "Education is the future." "I will," Sarah whispered. "And you," Jacob said to Michael, "you keep working with the horses. You have the gift." "I will," Michael said, his voice breaking. Finally, Jacob looked at Meredith. "You changed my life," he said simply. "You made it worth living again." "And you gave me mine," Meredith replied. "I love you, Jacob Anderson. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." Jacob smiled, that same gentle smile she had fallen in love with so many years ago. "Then I will go content. knowing I was loved by the best woman I ever met. He died quietly that night, with his family around him and Meredith's hand in his. The grief was profound, a tearing pain that Meredith thought might destroy her. But her children rallied around her, supporting her through the funeral and the difficult days that followed. "How do I do this without him?" she asked James one evening as they sat on the porch, her familiar spot now empty beside her. "The same way he did it after Sarah died," James said gently. "You keep going. You honor his memory by living fully. That is what he would want." And so Meredith did. She mourned deeply and honestly, but she also continued. She helped with the grandchildren, taught her daughters-in-law her recipes, and kept the house running smoothly. The ranch hands still came to her with their problems, knowing she would listen and offer wise counsel. 5 years passed. Meredith was 70 now, her hair white and her body showing the wear of a long, hard-working life. But her mind was sharp, and her spirit was unbroken. One spring morning, she walked out to the ridge where she and Jacob used to ride. Her grandson, James's son John, had brought her in the wagon, worried about her making the trip alone. She stood looking down at the Bar 7, at the life they had built together. "I found my voice here," she said to the wind, to Jacob's memory, to the land itself. "I found love and safety and purpose. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you for speaking softly until I was ready to speak loudly. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for loving me when I thought I was unlovable." She felt a sense of peace settle over her, a completion. She had lived a full life, had loved and been loved, had raised children and seen grandchildren born. The scared, silent girl who had arrived at the Bar 7 so many years ago was gone, replaced by a woman who had found her voice and used it well. Meredith lived 4 more years, dying peacefully in her sleep at the age of 74. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her bed, and her last words were, "Tell Jacob I am coming. Tell him to watch for me." She was buried next to Jacob on the hill overlooking the ranch. The headstone read, Meredith Vaughn Anderson, 1856–1930. She found her voice and never stopped speaking at the funeral. Tommy, now an old man himself, stood and spoke one last time. Miss Meredith taught us all something important. She taught us that it is never too late to heal. It is never too late to find your voice. It is never too late to be brave. She came here broken and left this world whole. That is a life well lived. The Bar 7 continued under James's management, then his sons, then his grandsons. The story of Jacob and Meredith became family legend, told to each new generation. The house where they had lived and loved remained standing, a testament to what they had built together. And on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right, the current residents of the Bar 7 swore they could hear it. A soft murmur of voices on the porch, the gentle sound of a man speaking softly and a woman's quiet reply. 2 souls who had found each other in the darkness and created a legacy of light that would endure for generations to come. The end.